The future of skills development isn't a mystery. We know it's broken, we've mapped the disruptions, but knowing isn't enough anymore. I'm Curtis Clark, and with my co host Troy Kay, we've created Catalyst for Change as a platform for leaders who refuse to sit on the sidelines of transformation. We're bringing together individuals that don't just analyze change, they steer it, pushing past comfortable consensus to have the hard conversations that decision makers across government, education, and industry need to hear. Our guest today isn't here to describe the problem, they're here to build solutions. And it is my pleasure to introduce Craig Robinson. Craig is the national leader for Deloitte Canada's education practice. He has over 27 years of experience working in the post-secondary education sector. Craig has advised universities, colleges, and governments across the globe. His expertise spans strategic planning, sector-wide transformation, fiscal sustainability, and operational reviews. Craig, welcome to Catalyst for Change.
Oh, thank you, Curtis. That's quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Oh, Craig, I'm sure you will. So why don't we jump into this? The first question I want to tease out is, in your view, what's the one headline that captures where education and higher education in Canada is right now?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a one-word headline because let's go for the shock as we think about it. And I just think it's deadlock. I think we're in a position where, the fiscal crisis the institutions face has been well documented. They are making the case to government around increased funding and the value that they offer. Government understands the value that is coming through education, but it either has no money, additional money to offer to solve the problem. It certainly doesn't want to put the additional burden of cost on students at this point in time. And it also looks at a system and institutions as being somewhat inefficient. More in quiet corners admit that they are not the most efficient. So I think we have this deadlock where we're looking at an ineffective conversation between governments and institutions around what the solution might be and who's responsible, and more importantly, who's going to pay for that. And where we have those kind of visionary, brave, and bold leaders within institutions who are trying to make a difference, they're being more and more constrained either by their legal acts or by their collective bargaining agreements or by just a lack of investment funding to be able to make any difference. So I kind of see that at the moment that word deadlock really summarizes why we're not seeing potentially the change and transformation that so many of us want to see.
So, in terms of that deadlock, do you see a way out of this, or are we just going to be in this kind of perpetual sense of gridlock? We're just on the hamster wheel moving along.
I think the expression's been used a lot over probably the last 5 or 6 years about why waste a good crisis. The challenge in doing that, and I think Canada now is in that point. So I've lived in Canada now for just over 11 years. And I arrived from the UK, and I had familiarity with other systems as well. And the UK ran out of money a long time before Canada did, and ran out of money in a much more dramatic way than Canada did. And that drove change. That drove a change in everything, but certainly drove change in the education system and who pays and how that was valued. Canada is still, until probably the last 12, 18 months, has been relatively comfortable in terms of that change. I think that relative comfort is disappearing. We have a number of institutions who are on the edge of insolvency and need to change. So I think that is going to be the platform that does it. We've had that crisis before with a few institutions where there's been kind of individual rescue funds and nobody's been allowed to fail. But I think the scale of the problem now is such that it has to change. I've been saying that for a while, but I do feel that now is the time that it has to give. The system can't continue to operate how it is.
So, you made reference about certain leaders saying it is time for change. Let us try new ideas and play within the spheres that they're confined by. Not necessarily who are some of those leaders, but what are some of the initiatives that those individuals are nudging the system with?
Yeah, I probably couldn't name them because I maybe wouldn't be invited back to anybody that I didn't name ever again. But trying to not lose friends so early in the normally the way
Not
to look
trying to
at it.
put you on the spot there, my
No,
friend.
no, I understand. I think there's a number of things, and I talked about bold and brave. I think there's a number of institutions who are looking for somebody else to find the answer, and that includes presidents and leadership teams, and very much saying, government, give us more money. And I understand that perspective because I really, truly have been a fan of education for a long time. It's been where my entire career has been spent. And so every dollar that we could put into an education is a good dollar as far as I see. But that's not going to happen. So I think there's a number who are not looking at that. The bold and the brave are saying we need to take control of our own future. We need to think about the markets we serve. We need to think about the education ecosystems that we're in. And we need to bring about change ourselves rather than waiting for governments to come and do something to us that we're not going to be very accepted about. So I think that boldness and that courage to do something. The other is the vision. I see leaders who are thinking very differently about what the education system needs to be, who it's for, and what they need to offer to move forward. So it's not a case of, hey, let's go and get some more international students from somewhere else, because we all know that's not going to be a path to success. It's limited in a lot of areas of the country around domestic growth at this point in time, but it isn't limited around how can we start to tackle things like lifelong learning? How can we start to think about what's happening with employers or industry need? How can we reinvent those kind of work? How can we really truly leverage the investment that's gone into things like micro credentials to move those things forward? So I think it's those kind of things, that kind of vision of who are we, what is our value, and where can we start to make a difference, either to an industry or sector or to community, depending on where you are. I think the third thing we're seeing more and more is a greater use of data and analytics to understand the markets that you're in and where the students are and what students want to see at this point in time. So having a more informed view, not let's just start another program, but much more around, okay, where is the job needs? Where's the skills needs? Where's the gaps? Where are the competition going? Where are we being successful? Where possible, where do we actually financially make any money out of delivering some of these programs, and where do we get through? So that greater use of those analytics and understanding of those things. And finally, and slightly too late in coming, is a much greater focus on student experience and student success. Starting to think about students as customers, and I've been chased from many institutions when I've ever suggested that, but actually saying, look, we have to put our students first now. So how can we do that? And if we can really focus in on our students first, then we can be a different kind of institution. Then we're going to be successful. So those would be, I think, the qualities I'm saying.
So Craig, you've outlined a few options there, right? There's a bunch of things that they could be doing. And you've mentioned that you need to have that vision. You need to be a bold leader. You've got the advantage of having a cross Canada view. You've got prior experience in the UK. If a president was to come to you, or a leader at an institution was to come to you today and say, what should I bet on for 2026, 2027? Because the other acknowledgement here is the glacial pace at which higher education as a sector tends to move. And yes, there's a crisis at hand. So sometimes that means people will move fast by the very nature of having a crisis to resolve. But there's a poly crisis too. It's a lot of pieces here. So what would you say would be your guidance around one or two things to place a bold bet on for 26, 27?
Well, I've got three things, because there's always
three things. Excellent.
Any good list is always three things.
Even better.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken drum, and I'm going to extend it lightly about being student focused. I think the one thing that's not going away is students, and being able to attract and retain and enable students to be successful is going to be the key to anyone's success moving forward. So whether that's in innovation, whether that's investment around technology to support that student experience, whether it's investment in program development to better meet student needs, I think it could be all of those, any plus all of those. But if you don't meet your market where it is, that's where it gets to. That's going to be impossible to do anything else. The second investment has to be thinking about how can you use technology as an enabler. We have a lot of conversations, particularly being Deloitte, around expensive ERP systems or perceived expensive ERP systems, and how can we save up enough money in the piggy bank to be able to invest in our technology, which is currently held together by sticky tape and back plastic, and we're photocopying things, and it's in Excel and all of those things. And I think we have to start thinking about it less as a cost and saving up, and more thinking about it as a utility, and what are you paying now for systems that do not work and are failing you, as opposed to what you should be investing in systems that are going to work for you, enable you to be more efficient, enable you to be more dynamic, provide a greater student experience, provide a greater experience for your people as well. So I think that thing, but changing it from how do we save up to do technology isn't that big and expensive, to what are our business issues and how can we use technology to enable those issues to be addressed would be the other thing. And the third, and this is going to sound really strange in terms of an investment, but I don't believe that any institution is going to be able to meet the new world where they want to be on their own. So I really do need to start thinking about partnerships and alliances. And whether that's partnerships with professional services, I'm bound to say that as my first list, obviously it's a shameless plug, or whether it's partnerships with industry, or whether it's partnerships with sectors. It's going to be absolutely fundamental to be able to do it, to bring about an alignment in supply and demand. It's no good saying we've created these micro credentials if industry doesn't want them. If you can find big employers, and Canada isn't blessed in many regions by hundreds of big employers or sectors that you can work with, and they can bring their people and say, this is our need. Can you meet our need, rather than what have you got in your programs? I think that's going to be a huge investment. The investment will pay off hugely in terms of returns. But I also think there needs to move from just being collegiate to being genuine cooperation across the sector as well. Because we've all been in the conversations, we've been in rooms around the world where we've had university presidents, college presidents all together, and everybody's all very collegiate and polite until it comes to somebody saying, okay, I'm going to not do this because I'm going to let you do that. You're going to be better than this than me. So I'll take a back foot and I'll take that back off and let you do that and move forward. So I think that is the other element. And the third investment is going to sound, again, slightly tangential, and it's not going to be an investment in terms of dollars, but I don't see good, effective government relations across the country at this point in time. The dialogue with provincial governments is pretty banal now to a certain extent, if I'm being quite crude at this point in time. It's, we're very valuable, give us some more money. We're very valuable, we haven't got any more money. Are you going to be efficient? No. But if they could actually have a dialogue together and actually work together on what is the needs, how do we need to move things forward, that's the only way that's going to be successful. And it's been great to see small examples of where that's worked and how that's actually starting to bring about change. So if you think about in BC, in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, there's been a need to address certain skills gaps. So whether that be a nursing program, a medical program, or a certain construction skills program, where government has come out and said, we need seats, you've seen an amazing response from institutions across the country to say, hey, we can do that. They haven't taken them 2 years to develop the program. They haven't only been able to do it around when their faculty delivered. There's been a genuine need. They've come together and they've delivered to do that. And I think that investment in those partnerships and alliances across each of those levels, I think is a fundamental investment that the presidents need to be leading forward over the next few years.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I'm going to flex a little bit on my own background, given I've got a background in technology. And maybe Curtis, you can flex on some of the other stuff that Craig has just touched on. But like in relation to that second point around technology as an enabler, Craig, you've got the opportunity nationwide to interact with a lot of the big vendors that are in play. And Deloitte obviously is a big SI player, but the other big technology players like the Oracles of the world, the Salesforces, the Workdays. Any advice, any thoughts on whether or not there's a change in which institutions should be making and how they engage with some of those big vendors? Because there's a lot of technology being discussed these days. AI is obviously a big topic across the board. So I'm just curious, from your point of view, from your vantage point, do you have any advice that you'd offer up to leaders from that engagement standpoint with those vendors?
It's a really good question, and it's probably one, if I was in a room sat beside you, I'd get you to answer rather than me answering you yourself. But as that's not how this is going to work, I'll take a stab at it. I would carry on the last point of the conversation around looking at a vendor or an implementer as a partner. I know that there's a commercial arrangement that needs to be developed and needs to be worked out, but also it needs to be done in genuine partnership. These are complex projects that can take time. And I think that's one point, would be think about them as partners and how you're going to work with them as well. The other mindset would be is think less about who the vendor is and more about what are the primary issues that I'm looking to solve. What are the business opportunities I'm looking to do? How am I looking to improve my student experience? Is recruitment a pain point for me at this point in time? Do I even understand how many people I have on payroll and who's being paid what and how well my faculty are used? And I think if you start to have a conversation much more about these are the issues, this is the pressing issue, this is the value I want you to bring, rather than how much is your software, I think those conversations are the critical conversations to have moving forward.
Yeah, let me flex my muscles then in terms of the area that I think is an important one. And you talk about partnerships and collaboration. And we talk about institutions, we talk about within the institutions and government working together. But we sometimes miss the other essential partners. That's the student. And we sometimes miss the industry partner as well. And you talk about the student experience. Can you tease that out a little bit more in terms of what that student experience could be and should be, especially when we're talking about them as partners in this learning trajectory?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It's a story I've told a few times. So my youngest son is currently going through the process of applying to university. So he's at grade 12 in high school. Probably won't appreciate me talking about him now. But it's been really fascinating to see just from a recruitment lens, and I won't name the institutions that he's applied to and where it goes, but how his experience has been totally altered. So he had his institution in mind that he thought he was going to go to. Another institution offered a free application. And so he applied and he got his response back within 48 hours and his kind of indication of what bursary and support, financial support he would get. And he said, I'm not going. And I said, why aren't you going? He said, why don't you go to the open day? So he went to the open day and they absolutely blew his mind in terms of the experience, the positivity, the welcome, the guiding, the explanation of the residents, the people who were took the programs he was interested in, was so enthusiastic about it all that he came back and the meal hall was great, which I can't believe is anything other than a one-off, but let's see. And he came back and he was like, I'm going to think seriously about them now. And then he went to his number one choice. Terrible open day. Faculty not really engaged in terms of talking about the program. Lack of response. Took a number of weeks before he got his response back. No indication of what financial aid he might get until he signs up and commits that he's going to go there. No help with accommodation. And I think if I use that as a microcosm around student experience, that's where I go to. It's like he knows that we're spending a lot of money on this, and he's looking for somebody who's actually going to interested in what he wants to do, is interested in his experience, and wants to gear their solution around him and engaging him because it's a nervous, anxious time. Is he going to be accepted? What kind of support will he get? Will he be able to do the program he wants? Will he be able to get into the residence he wants? And that's how I see the student experience. And obviously, it doesn't stop. We hope it doesn't stop when he arrives at wherever it might be, but it then gets to, okay, how do we really engage? How can we use analytics? How can we look at trends and support you in terms of, hey, you haven't been to a lecture for 3 weeks, or we've noticed you've not been to the meal hall for 3 weeks. How can we do those things? So that's how I view the student experience, because he knows he's paying a lot of money towards that. I still go to schools now where we have that conversation which says students don't really know what they want, or we need to tell them what they need. And that's how it's going to be. So I think that's an example.
And that's a really good framing, because I think it's not just once they're there, it's the engagement as they're entering into the sphere of, this is a big step for many of these individuals. How am I going to be embraced and brought into the community of the institution as well? Now, another part of that is, I want to coach you a little bit more too, is around the educational experience, because we're talking about building the workforce of the future, the skills, the exposure that a student gets. And part of that is that student experience. Are we seeing more of that in terms of the work placement, the integrated programming that enables the student to get that kind of experience, so that when they leave the institution, they really have the skill sets that are preparing them for the workforce of the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been talked about for so long now in terms of work integrated learning. There's institutions that have goals to have 100% of their programs include some element of work integrated learning. A huge amount of effort goes into those experiences. So I think we're seeing a lot of movement in that direction. I don't know if we're seeing a lot of movement in that direction in terms of the overall programs themselves. I just think the speed at which work is changing and the ability to articulate, what is it like being a consultant Deloitte? What do you need to do? What is it like being a first year lawyer in terms of where they go? I don't know that people were moving fast enough to keep up to speed with how the world of work is changing in some of those programs. And what we see is a lot of programs continuing on and maybe bits of new ones coming through. But I think there's the broader experience, yes, really getting to those new programs, which are totally aligned with the skills needed now. I think that's one of the problems with the system. It just takes too long to develop new programs and go through QA, etc.
Yeah. Turn it over to you, Troy.
Yeah, just building on that one too, Craig. I'm curious. I alluded to it, and you just kind of replicated the statement around the pace of change and the lack thereof, of the pace being quite slow. To that end, do you think there are some legacy narratives that just exist in post-secondary that need to be left behind in 2026? Like, for example, you talked about student success.
Yeah.
A lot of institutions, from my experience, will look at a big ERP investment and go, that's our solution for student success. And it's, maybe not. Like it's not a silver bullet. So just curious, like, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So the first one I would start with is that survival is compulsory, because it's not. There's been that point of view is that everybody thinks everyone's going to be around forever and someone's going to back up the Brinks truck with the cash in and things are going to go forward. So I think I'd take a bet that there will be less public institutions in Canada within 5 to 10 years. I'm not going to say where or who it might be, but I don't think we can say that survival is compulsory. The current system is unaffordable, and we need to see that narrative disappear. The other system I think will change is around being a supply-led system, in that a lot of funding wherever you go around the country is geared around making sure that we maintain the infrastructure of the institutions, that we're able to continue to fund faculty, fund administration, fund student supports, with not really paying any regard to what students want or how many students there is and what programs they're demanding moving forward. So I'd like to see this kind of, if we build it, they will come, change to a narrative which says we're going to be really market driven. So I think, I don't know what the narrative is around that, but I feel that give us money to survive isn't the narrative anymore. It's let's be market focused and we'll bring money to you. It's the other narrative. And a bit of a mixed answer to this one is we've been saying for as long as I've been involved, 30 years, that lifelong learning is key. Everyone's going to be a lifelong learner. We're all going to be doing micro credentials. We're all going to be going back to colleges and universities for however long. And it's just not true. Yes, it's really important. Yes, retraining and reskilling is very important. But if it is a straw poll of people on this call, I don't know many of us have gone back and done formal qualifications outside of work for 20, 30 years, assuming in terms of how old everybody is. So I think the narrative about lifelong learning needs to be made true rather than not be true. I think it's how do we genuinely move to making it possible? Because if we don't open those gates, then there's no way that the current infrastructure and the current ecosystems can survive. If we can actually tap into that and actually get people to continue to be lifelong learners, then I think that's a world, but that's going to take some time and it's going to take a very different approach to what we've got today.
And that's not just an initiative that's driven by post-secondaries. It needs to be government, industry, and all the partners in this ecosystem of skills development.
And I was thinking about this morning, and I'm always super mindful of these conversations. You can be seen to be really negative about post-secondary. And this isn't a post-secondary problem. It's a Canadian problem. And the stats I used to frame my thinking this morning was Canada is still number one when it comes to tertiary qualification achievements for 18 to 24. Number one in the world. But we're number 18 when it comes to productivity. We have a world-class education system, and let's not get away from that. The problem is it's maybe a little dated. It's certainly not affordable, and it's certainly not delivering the skills needs that the economy needs for the country to thrive moving forward. So that's where I start to think about how do you start to change some of those things? You need to think about, okay, how do we really focus in on how can we be different to do it? But yeah, lifelong learning is a tough thing. I grew up in the UK. We ran out of money, and we also had a bigger skills crisis much earlier as well. And the investment that goes into changing mindsets, and I haven't seen any of this in Canada yet. So there was big programs that looked at working with industry and employers to say you need to be meeting your financial responsibilities when it comes to training and development, because after all, you can't operate and be profitable without it. But that was initially an investment by government to bring them to the table. And then it moved to a tax. So there was and still is, the apprenticeship levy on large employers in the UK who actually have, if they do not train people, have to pay a tax to government to be able to move it forward. But there's also been national marketing campaigns aimed at parents and adults and people who've left out post-secondary education. Like if I walk around, if I have a New Year's Eve party and start talking to people about micro-credentials, everyone glazes over. Nobody knows what they are because the marketing about them has been absolutely nothing. Again, we go back to the UK, we have National Apprenticeship Week. In fact, it's been months at times to promote skills development. We have Learners of the Year. We have Mature Learner of the Year. It's like we need this mindset to change, that post-secondary is going to solve everything. And once you come out of there with your degree or your master's, that you're never going to need to go back again. So it's that collective. So yeah, good question, Curtis. And yeah, I think there's the whole ecosystem and mindset needs to change around it.
Brilliant.
And appreciating the perspective, Craig, because it's much like you've alluded to, it's bold, right? It's like some of those statements are bold. And I think post-secondary and beyond might feel a bit uncomfortable. And so I was going to ask you, like, if there was an unpopular opinion that you might hold about transformation. But I think you maybe covered some of them already, and that's fine. That's absolutely awesome.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's any great case studies of transformation at this point in time. If we're thinking big transformation, can we move to a demand-led system? Like the UK, we used to have an expression about let the money follow the learner. So wherever the learner went is where the funding went, not into the institution. So you had to compete to a certain extent. So I don't know that we've seen enough transformation yet, but I would like to see some of those things moving forward. But I think it's unpopular, but I don't know. I think it's quietly spoken by a number of executive leaders within institutions and outside of institutions that they know change needs to come, and that it's not going to be just about the same individual institutions moving forward. I think if I'm calming the mad crowds at this point in time, I think there's a window where institutions can manage this and can take control of their own destinies by working together and partnering and strategically aligning together to deliver success. Whereas if that doesn't happen, there will be effectively rationalization. I think there's been a phenomenal job done at surviving over the last 2 years and some really difficult circumstances. And what I'm challenging now and asking to people to think about is how can we move to thriving? Because if the continued dialogue is about 3% cuts and 5% cuts and this program going here, then we're not going to have the world-class education system that we need to move that productivity forward and to give students that experience that we all want them to have.
So what is that one sort of outcome or that one thing that you think will nudge and change the behavior? In 2026, what's that thing that's going to have everyone just go, oh, we're not fooling here. This is a critical moment, and we do need to now thrive.
I don't know. We're all aware of Laurentian and how they managed to pull back from the precipice. I thought that might have been an initial shot across the bow for institutions as to where things might change. I don't know whether it might be a shock around funding and the fact that it's not going up, or the fact that it might go down by 10, 20% as to where things might be. But those are kind of things that the system or the governments, provincial governments can control. For an institution, I think about what is it that they need to do. I think it's going to be going through that pain. It's going to be going through the pain of, we can't do that because of our collective agreements. We can't do that. That's not how our Senate operates. We can't do that. It takes us 2 years to develop a program. So I don't know if there's one moment internally that does it. I just think the whole thing is getting to a point of where we go. Or the other point might be some institution actually does go bankrupt and is actually closed because it's not able to operate, which will cause all sorts of problems for the communities if that happens.
No. Listen, Craig, I think we've come to the time here, and we are truly grateful for you giving this time and being engaged in such a conversation as this. It is so important for us to capture this. And as we say, we want to have the conversations that are uncomfortable, but also thoughtful and really articulate what the kind of leadership that's required as we move forward into 2026 and into the future of both post-secondaries, but I think the skills development nationally. And to your point, as a national point of view, our productivity, our ability to thrive in the space, and it's so important right now. So thank you. Thank you again for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
That's great.
Take care.
Take care. So Curtis, that was pretty awesome. I definitely appreciated Craig's commentary there, and he's not one to shy away from bold statements. I think we heard that Canadian higher education isn't short on self-awareness. They're all acutely feeling the pressures of their current situation. Craig coined it as, I guess, I was going to say stalemate, but it was a different word he used. Gridlock or...
Yeah, the gridlock, yes.
But there's also some out there, some of those bold visionaries who are seeing the opportunities that exist in a time of crisis. So I really felt like today's conversation with Craig kind of pushed us past that awareness piece and into some of the action items, right? So really focusing on the bets that matter for 2026 and beyond, right? So things like student success, partnerships with industries and vendors, skills development nationally with a focus on that as well. And I think he really challenged us to abandon some of those outdated narratives and start to measure things that really matter, which I guess for all intent and purposes ties down to things like student value, right? What are we actually providing to the student? And I really appreciated that model of funding follows the student. I thought that was an interesting perspective and based on prior experience, like stuff that he's seen in the UK, a country, a region that's gone through this before. And he really talked about the fact that the opportunity exists now to move past surviving and into thriving. And to do that, you have to really be thinking about what impact can we have now and what impact can we have over the long term. Because I think ultimately we're not here to admire the complexity of the problem anymore. We're here to discuss solutions with leaders who, as you said at the outset, refuse to sit on the sidelines. And I think it's really the next chapter of education is going to be written by those people who are those bold visionary leaders and who are going to start now.
Yeah. And I think what's really great about this conversation with Craig is he set a platform for us to look at the other guests that are coming, over the next number of weeks, who are either in jurisdictions that have been playing with these concepts or are also looking at what are those macro and micro issues that leaders need to pay attention to actually start moving this forward, to start that process of thriving and not just being responsive. So I think this has been a really great opportunity, not only for us to narrow it into the Canadian context, but this is something that's broader than just our own borders as well. So yeah, what a great way to start this conversation, and looking forward to the next set of conversations we're going to have over the next few weeks.
Agreed. Can't wait for the future guests.
All right.